Hi, welcome to IndyCar on the 3rd of June. Today's the day that the Trump lands, and we've seen, well, an absolutely incredible sight of the entire English nation rising up as one to welcome the Orange King from across the water. We've had red carpets, double helicopters, 4 helicopters at one point, masked people outside Buckingham Palace. We've had horse guards, we've had 21 gun salutes, we've had the Queen, we've had Prince Charles. Pretty much every single member of the royal family has been wheeled out of the cupboard to meet the big Orange King from across the pond. And why? Well, because England doesn't have any choice, because they're going to Brexit, and that means they're going to lose all of their European trade because they're going to have a hard Brexit. And Donald Trump has swept in, knowing full well that England is on its uppers and has no choice in the matter. So he has been wooed like nobody has been wooed before by the English people, basically prostrating themselves at his feet and laying on banquets. He's being wined and dined by the top royalty. In fact, there is no higher level of diplomatic sycophancy than we're seeing at the moment. So you can gather that I'm not really wildly enthusiastic about Donald being here. And his ambassadors already said quite plainly that the National Health Service is going to be part of the negotiations. And we're not even actually doing the trade deal yet, because we haven't actually left the European Union yet. But Donald's over here to do the business, and the British government is bending over and waiting for him to do that business. So how does that affect us in Scotland? Well, it affects us in the most dramatic way that you can imagine. We have the finest beef herds in the world here, with the highest standards of husbandry and the highest standards of hygiene, and the European Union has set those standards even higher than we might have done had we been on our own. And we could maintain those massively high food standards and eat the best quality food in the world, or we could do what Donald Trump wants us to do and lower our standards to the same as the Americans, so that we can have insect legs and what else was there? There was insect legs, there was hairs from animals, and all sorts of other things that are permitted to be present in American foods. So we've got hormone injected beef, chlorinated chicken, and all kinds of other delicacies coming our way from the Americans. To which they have said, obviously, we don't have to buy these American foods, but on the other hand, we might not have a choice if we aren't being able to buy anything from Europe after Halloween this year. In my mind, it seems worthwhile for Scotland to do something as well. Since the English are basically pushing the boat out, and they are spending, as I understand it, at least £75 million just on the police for the 3 days that Donald Trump is in London. Why doesn't Scotland do something similar? We're a country after all. We want to trade with Europe. Why don't we invite 27 heads of European states over to Scotland for a massive bean feast over here, Scottish style? We could have a massive banquet, perhaps in a banqueting hall at Stirling Castle. I mean, what more fitting place could there be than the ancient Scottish royal palace at Stirling for 27 European heads of state to meet with the Scottish government and basically to talk about the business of how Scotland will be trading with Europe after England becomes the 51st state of the United States. Because that's what's going to happen. Scotland has no choice in the matter. We are going to be dragged along no matter what we say or do. If we remain part of the United Kingdom, we will become Anglified Scots mixed up with a bit of Anglo-Americanism. I mean, the whole thing really is, it's not just distasteful, it's disgusting. We are basically surrendering ourselves to a hotelier who is now ruling the free world as he sees it. And frankly, I mean, this business with Huawei, the Chinese company who are basically just building hardware for a telephone network, doesn't really bother me. So it's just the second time somebody's banged into my car with the door today. Anyway, what I was going to say is Huawei, a Chinese company which is partly owned by the Chinese state, but then again, British Leyland was partly owned by the British state. Didn't mean we were spying on people through our cars. The Chinese make excellent phones, and they make them cheaper than the rest of the world. So why not use Chinese equipment? The Americans don't like it because they're trying to pump up the ante and create some kind of new Cold War against the Chinese, simply because the Chinese have outdone them in business. The Chinese are now far more wealthy than the Americans. They dominate the world of business, and their Belt and Road initiative is going to link China up with all corners of the world for trade, and the Americans don't like it. Anyway, that brings me back to Scotland, and why don't we entertain our friends from Europe and say to them, well, we're not going to be joining in, becoming, a part of Trumpton's suburban landscape. We have decided we're going to stay Europeans. Scotland has always been a European country. We have traded across the North Sea with Europe for centuries. We've trained. I'm sorry. We have traded with the Low Countries for decades, with the Dutch, with the Flemish, with the Belgians. We have traded with Denmark and Sweden and Norway, even the Faroe Islands. We've traded all up and down the western seaboard of Europe for centuries, and there's no reason why we should stop now. So why don't we have a state visit? But why don't we have 27 state visits all rolled into one great big state visit? We could outdo the English and have more heads of state coming to our palace for a massive banquet than they have. We don't need people in bearskin hats marching up and down in front of a palace to show off. We just need to entertain our guests in the way only Scots know how, with a massive feast, with the finest salmon, the finest beef, the finest fruit and vegetables, the best drink in the world. And there is no reason why we can't outdo them in terms of our hospitality to our visitors. And I think we should. I think it's only dignified for a small country like Scotland to stick two fingers up at Westminster and say, anything you can do, we can do 27 times better than you. America is a country. Europe is 27 countries. And not only is Europe 27 countries, but we can also do business with China, we can do business with the Commonwealth, we can do business with Iceland, Greenland, anybody else that we fancy. We're not tied to, if we're not tied to the UK. So those are my opinions. I think we should be looking at our own future, not at England's future and wringing our hands over what Donald Trump will do. Donald Trump is not going to touch Scotland. The only thing that Donald Trump will own in Scotland is that golf course in the northeast of Scotland, and even then he probably will eventually pull out because he can't stand looking at wind turbines. So that's my view on things at the moment. It's time that we stopped sitting around watching what England does and do something for ourselves. Why not have a state visit by the European Union to Scotland, to Edinburgh Castle, to the Scottish Parliament, and then on maybe to Stirling Castle, to that massive banqueting hall in that beautiful royal palace at Stirling Castle. What a backdrop that would make for 27 heads of state to dine in one of the most historic sites in Scotland. Anyway, that's about it for today. Just wanted to counter the Trump narrative with a narrative of my own, but why don't we do that? Why don't we do something like that? I'm sure it can be organised. We don't have to be... We don't have to have left the UK to do this, because this is just a little bit of soft power diplomacy from Scotland. We are entitled to have visiting dignitaries across to our country anytime we like. It's not a reserved power after all. So I think we should do that. I think Nicola Sturgeon should issue a nice invitation on vellum or parchment to every head of state of the European Union and ask them all to come over to Scotland to see how Scotland does business, and also to talk about our future trade agreement with the European Union and what the options are, so that when we're independent in a couple of years' time, we'll be able to lay that before the people and say, these are the options that we've discussed with our 27 European heads of state, and these are the possibilities for how we can trade into and out of Europe. And then we can have a separate referendum on that, and that answers the question of whether or not we stay in Europe. It would be so easy to do, and we could outdo the English in a competition of how many heads of state can you have at state visit at once. Anyway, that's it for today. I'm off to see Alan Knight about making a movie, but I will see you all tomorrow. Bye for now.